Hey, Lower School family. Welcome back to the Lower School Lowdown. My name is Danielle Lefevers, and I am here to talk to you today about this ever interesting and growing topic of conversation. What is the science of learning? And I know that we've been hearing all about science of reading, science of math, now science of writing is coming out. So what exactly is the science of learning? And I want to start by highlighting that this is not a curriculum, a program, or a new initiative. I know that we all hear something new coming down the track and we think, oh no, a new program. What are we going to do? Is it going to work? Are we going to use it for a few years, get rid of it? But this is actually science of learning when you get into its core. It's talking about how do people actually learn, remember, and apply new information. And so this is research from cognitive science, psychology, neuroscience, and education. And for us, what that means is, what does it look like in an actual classroom? So the science can tell us a lot about how learning happens, but teachers still have to figure out what that means for the kids that are actually sitting in front of us. So let's start by talking about students learn what they think about. That concept consistently comes up throughout science of learning. So a lesson can be incredibly fun, engaging, but what are students actually thinking about? Learning gets stronger when students are actively able to work with information. So can they retrieve it? Can they explain it? Are they connecting it? Are they comparing it? Are they applying it? We talk a lot about Bloom's taxonomy within education and how are they able to apply the concepts. It really starts and begins with that retrieval practice, that explanation, and then those connections that lead to application later on. So for retrieval practice, instead of immediately saying something like, look back at your notes, instead, we might want to try to rephrase questions that we're asking students, such as tell your partner 3 things you learned, or what do you remember from yesterday? Those things that are doing quick brain dumps or quick brain retrievals from the day before. The next part of science of learning that is important to discuss is how working memory is limited. So we can only process a limited amount of new information at once. This is why those things that I know that we already do within the classroom, but chunking, modeling, working examples, guided practice, and gradually removing support over time are so beneficial for students. So we break it apart, they practice, they build automaticity with it, and then this frees up the mental space that's necessary for harder thinking later on. Explicit instruction and deeper thinking aren't opposites. And sometimes that's something that educators get in their head that, oh, if I'm teaching them explicitly, then that means that they're not thinking deeply about the material. Sometimes that explicit instruction is necessary to make the deeper thinking possible. The next aspect of science of learning that I want to talk about is prior knowledge and how prior knowledge matters. So what students already know changes what they're able to learn next. And I think that this is something that we're aware of as educators of, oh, they don't have this foundational skill, so I'm not going to be able to build on that concept or that thinking for this more complicated concept. If I am going to, for example, ask students to give me an article about a complicated match that somebody is playing, I can read the words. I can, let's say that it's about the sport cricket. Without knowing much about cricket, I'm probably missing a lot of background information. Background knowledge matters, vocabulary matters in that case, content-rich science and social studies will matter, and knowledge supports the comprehension and critical thinking that then happens as a result of the learning. So knowledge is what gives us something to critically think about. So if we're able to have that foundational understanding, then we're able to launch further into the topic area and really truly understand it, to think critically about the subject matter. Perhaps my favorite takeaway from what I've researched on science of learning, and I would not by any means call myself a complete expert on this, but I did do research to be able to present this podcast to you all. My favorite takeaway, though, that I got from the research that I did is that science does not replace the teacher. So research is going to identify principles of learning for us. It's going to identify ways for us to potentially reach students based on neuroscience, based on psychology, based on the science of learning. However, teachers are going to notice misconceptions, decide when to slow down, give feedback, motivate students, and adjust instruction along the way. And this allows us to know the individual learner. The curriculum can't look at a child's face and recognize that idea of, oh no, I've lost them in the process of teaching. So for us, this research is what's telling us what's going to work for students in the classroom on a consistent basis, but we determine what that means for students in the classroom that we are in today. Now, I am going to get a little bit into the science of reading debate. The science of reading has become a debate amongst educational researchers, psychologists, neuroscientists across the country. Science of reading has strongly emphasized this explicit foundational reading instruction, which includes phonemic awareness and phonics. But the conversation is now evolving. We're asking more nuanced questions about this. So how much phonics should we be teaching? How long are we spending on this? Which approach is going to be the most appropriate with phonics instruction? Which students are going to benefit the most from this? When do we transition into more increasingly complex reading? All of this to say that evidence supporting a principle does not mean that evidence of that one particular program is the end all be all. So when you hear something like, oh, this is research based, our next question should be, what research? The science of writing is something else that we're starting to hear more about. Research points towards both an explicit foundational instruction of handwriting, spelling, grammar, sentence construction, and authentic writing of explaining, arguing, storytelling, writing about what students are learning. Ultimately, what this comes down to is what we know that reading and writing do reinforce each other, and that writing about content can strengthen students' learning about the content area. So I believe that these are concepts that you're already familiar with, which is partially why I don't think we should be as afraid of maybe this idea of science of learning as we might be. One of the favorite things that I learned throughout this research is that scientists and educational researchers believe that teachers should behave more like researchers within the classroom. So try something, observe, gather evidence, adjust, try again. Now, that's something that we already do in our classrooms. This is what good teaching is. And I know as lower school teachers, we know this already. So research is just informing this process for us and further supporting us. This research is telling us what tends to work across different learners, and our classroom is informing what's happening for these learners. Now, let's get into the 5 key takeaways. If you remember nothing else from this whole podcast, this is the most important aspect for us to look at from science of learning. So the retrieval process, asking students to remember before you just reteach. Chunking, don't overload their working memory. Connect, new learning needs prior knowledge to attach to. So always make sure that you're connecting back to previous content. Explain, have students talk, write, justify, compare, and teach, and then adjust. So use research and what you're observing with your students to help your adjustments. And I'm hoping that this podcast provides you an opportunity to hear a little bit more about what is happening in the world of educational research. So maybe this gives you a starting point to be able to adjust along the way. Maybe this gives you some new ideas. I do plan on meeting with different teachers throughout the building, different teachers throughout our school, and educational researchers to be able to build on content knowledge. So if you feel like you have particular content knowledge to share with our faculty and staff, please let me know so that I can have you on the show. So to close out, the science of learning isn't a recipe for perfect teaching. It's a growing body of research that helps us understand why some instructional practices tend to work. And most importantly, the science is still evolving. Our goal isn't just, am I following the science? It should be, what does the research suggest? What am I seeing in my students? And how should those two things inform what I'm going next? Here on the Liver School Lowdown, my goal is to help give you ideas to implement into your classroom. And I want you to leave you with this. What's something you already do in your classroom that the science of learning might help explain?